Good afternoon, good evening, or whenever you're listening or watching this program. This is the Lawrence County Oral History Project. My name is Norm Taylor. I'm one of the co-hosts today. And it's good to be back and with you. It's a cold April day. You know, we've had a pretty warm, nice end of March and 1st of April, but today it's just kind of back, one of those cold spring days, but you know, warmer weather coming. It had some good rain last night, and mushrooms are going to be popping up. We have one of the top mushroom hunters in the world that is with us today. I'm going to introduce you. He's a new guest. I don't think you've ever seen him before. He's my co-host, but it's been years ago since he was on. Lee Hutchison. Lee, it's good having you. Lee's like a bear. He goes into hibernation in the wintertime, but when it comes springtime, Lee's back with us. Lee, are you a great mushroom hunter?
Oh yeah, I've retired. I've sold the farm, so I quit hunting mushrooms.
So you don't have mushrooms anymore?
Not very well. Well, I'd rather hunt golf balls.
Okay.
Golf balls. You hunt golf balls.
Yeah, Lee's a good golfer too, but I figure you'd be a good mushroom. You're pretty good about anything, so I figure you'd be a good mushroom hunter too. Tell us some good spots so we can go find some.
Yeah, that's always a top secret. You know.
Well, Lee, but did you have a pretty good winter?
Pardon?
Did you have a good winter? Good winter?
Oh yes, good winter. Yes.
Yeah. So, did you get anything done?
Anytime you make it to spring, you've had a good winter.
That's true. That's true. So, but it's good having you back. It's been a while since we've done a program.
Oh yeah.
And you know, but it was kind of a rough winter at times. It seemed like we would talk about getting a program going, then we'd have a big snowfall or ice or something. So it's kind of good getting back into it.
Yeah, that's true.
What's going on in the realm of veterans? Anything new since we've talked last?
Well, I spoke at the American Legion. The American Legion have had their 91st birthday. You know.
How old? How old are they?
91 years old.
91 years old. Well,
happy birthday.
I
believe that's right. Don't quote me on that. Maybe older.
Oh, okay. Well, happy birthday, American Legion then. At least 91.
It's not 99.
Okay. All right.
But,
so you did some speaking over the winter?
Yeah, just once. Only one person. After they heard me, nobody else would call.
Well, we're always glad to have you. The History Festival coming up here pretty soon, and Lee will be out there. He's always out there talking with kids and has his books and so forth. So we'll be having him back at the History Festival, the Lord willing, and back again. Had a good article on the veteran van.
Oh yes,
that was a good article.
That's an awesome sight to go up to VA hospital and see all those vans.
Oh, that would be.
And know that Lawrence County has purchased their van and financed it and paid for it.
A new van, and I know that's a blessing for those guys.
Oh yeah. They go up every day practically.
A good article, and you know, every once in a while you get to see some good articles. A veteran was in the article here recently about making a trip to, I think, to Washington D.C. That was a good article here recently too.
Jack Henderson.
I think, World War II veteran, I believe. Mm-hmm. We will be having, I don't know if this will be shown maybe after the History Festival time, but veterans are welcome, Lee, out with our powwow this year. The Grand Entry also honors our veterans, and you guys are welcome to come out to that. All veterans are welcome to come out to that and be a part of the Grand Entry.
That opening ceremony.
At noon, opening ceremony with the Native Americans.
Very impressive.
About 50 different tribes are going to be represented.
Well, it's going to be different this year. You're going to have the Indians there.
About 50 different nations represented, all the way from Arapaho to Apache, Lakota, Cheyenne, Cherokee, Miami, Delaware.
We've always had the cowboys there and the stagecoach.
Well,
now we got the Indians.
Yeah, I don't know. You never know. Might come. I just heard today that Custer Scouts are going to be there, so I don't know what that tells us. We have Custer Scouts there too. But yeah, we're going to have a lot of our Native American friends there, and so we're looking forward to that. So hopefully we can get some veterans out, be a part of that Grand Entry as well. Well, we have a couple guests with us today, nearest to me. So you're going to have to look at me over here, Russell, and you're the clearest one. Is that pretty difficult to have to look at me this whole time? If you need to, you can always just look toward Roy or Lee there.
This will make it easier.
Russell Webb's with us today. Russell, good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, and of course, and this is the first time for Russell to be on the program. And Roy Smith, Roy does some substituting in the North Lawrence Community Schools, so I know you've gone through that battle, that battle with the kids.
Yep.
Yeah, and you survived it so far, haven't you, Roy?
Yep.
Roy, it's good having you with us today.
Thank you.
These two are veterans, and it's good to always have our veterans with us. It's been difficult sometimes getting our veterans. We've been on for 3 years, Lee, and boy, we're running out of names sometimes, aren't we? It's been difficult.
It's always funny when I'm out pushing books. Everybody, the veterans all come up and say how much they enjoy the program.
Yeah.
But when I ask them to come on, they back away.
Oh, yeah, I've had people run from me,
so
too.
we always
Yeah.
appreciate guys who will come on and get to have the record. I tell them, I say, well, it's an easy way to write your history, your military history.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to write it. You just talk it, and then we give you the disc, and you can share that with your
How
family.
many times families have come up to me and say, boy, we appreciate that you were able to finally get Dad to talk and so forth and get this on there. And a lot of them, Lee, since we have been on the air the last 3 years, have already gone on. I mean, have passed away. And so I've been at the funeral home of some of our veterans, and families come to me and they say, we really appreciate that you were able to get this on. So veterans out there, your story is important to us. You can contact me or Lee, and we'll be glad to talk to you about getting on the air on this. So we want to preserve what you've done for our country. Russell, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you from?
I was raised in Oolitic. After I got out of high school, I joined the Army, took basic training in '66. They sent me to Viet Nam, came back, was a staff sergeant, went to Officers Candidate School. After that, they sent me to Germany and Panama and different places in the U.S. I got out in '91, and I've been out for about 18 years, worked in several places around here. Jobs are not as easy to get as I remember. I met a lot of fine people, got to see a lot of places in the world that I would not got to see otherwise. But if I had it to do over again, I'd do it. Instead of staying in 25, I'd have stayed in the whole 30. I made a mistake that I got out before the 30.
Yeah.
But that's kind of it in a nutshell. I was in infantry divisions most of the time. I was in the 101st, the 82nd, 8th Division, 193rd in Panama.
Oh, there's a lot there to explore there, Russell. I knew some Webbs back, and you say you graduated in '66 from Oolitic?
It would have been 65.
65.
Yeah.
Well, I knew a lot of those people around that time period. I was an Oolitic graduate of '71. But Dean Barnes comes to mind. Kenny Kirkman, Jimmy New, these guys that played basketball. Danny Bond. I don't know if you remember any of those.
All of them.
You knew all those
They
guys.
were all in my class.
Yes, right. And they had a good basketball team right there, 64, 65 in those years.
Yes.
They sure did.
I played with them some of the years, I guess, most of the years, but I did more of the bench warming than I did play.
So me too. Were you on the varsity team then, back in 64, 65, or junior varsity?
No, I was not.
Okay.
I was not.
Yeah, so you played like the junior high freshman or that? Sure.
Yes.
Ronnie Webb, Davy Webb, or any of those Webbs in relation to you?
Ronnie's my brother.
Okay.
Davy was my cousin.
Okay. Well, I knew a lot of those Webb. Marsha Webb.
She's my sister.
Okay. So now see, so I know your family there, and I knew a lot of those Webbs during that Oolitic years myself.
Yeah.
Did you know Mark Bundy?
No, I don't think so. I don't remember the name.
Mark was I can remember it well. He was an Oolitic grad, maybe a little bit later than that, but he was killed in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And one of the Oolitic, I don't know if he may have been the only Oolitic casualty, I think, of the Vietnam War, as far as I know. But I've known a great family. Diane teaches at Shawswick, and just a great family. His sister, Marcia, is wife of superintendent down in Orleans area. But I can remember very well he went to Vietnam, a great guy, a nice-looking guy, and he didn't come back. And I've often thought about Mark over these years. But I don't know how many went from Oolitic to Vietnam, but how many others do you think went from your graduating class may went to Vietnam?
No more than probably two or three that I know of.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the Bundys. He was probably a grade or two or three off from me.
Mm-hmm.
I was gone for 25 years in the Army, and I lost out during that time for what happened to people. Who was who? I've just kind of forgotten it.
Right. 65, you graduated. Did you get drafted or did you join up?
I joined.
And what was the reason? Why did you join?
I worked in a stone mill here called Ingalls Stone Mill that went out in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
I guess running a planer was not exciting enough. There was no advancement that I could see. Both myself and my wife were interested in seeing another part of the world and having another chance to do something else. And that's why we joined. There's a lot of opportunity in the military. The military sent me on something called bootstrap to get a college degree, and then later on they sent me to get a master's degree. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of opportunity there if you use it, if you ask for it, if you can pass the test high enough to be accepted. There's opportunity. So It was good for us.
So you felt in 1965 that it was going to be a good even career step for you, I guess.
Yes.
And one was there. It's called the training, the education that you
Yes.
could receive in 65. But yet, Russell, the Vietnam War was starting to go. It was already going, and it was probably, it was building. I know there were some career opportunities here, but yet there was also the opportunity to go to the jungles of Vietnam, right?
Yeah, but I saw it as a chance for adventure and kind of a price that you paid to get into the system, where in order to do it, in order to be competitive in the military, you have to do certain things, whether it's education or to go to Vietnam or Iraq or wherever you have to go. You have to have that. You have to have the badges and all the ribbons and all that sort of stuff in order to be competitive for your next promotion.
Okay.
So that all kind of developed, and yes, it's a pain, and yes, all the people that are in Iraq and Afghanistan from around here, I feel sorry for them. In a way, I spent 1 year in Vietnam. Some of those guys are spending 2 or 3 over there.
Right.
So I kind of feel sorry in a way for them, but it still is enough motivation to know that your family is going to be taken care of and your medical bills are going to be paid for, and you have a chance to advance if you want to put in the time.
Good point. Good point. And Lee, we would like to have even some Iraqi or Desert Storm or Afghanistan veterans in too. They need to get a hold of us too. We'd love to have them on there. Russell, in 1965, you graduated and you went ahead and went to the recruiting office and joined up.
Yeah.
Where did you go for your basic training?
Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Okay, so you went a little south there.
Yeah, I went there in AIT. Actually, the first year and a half or so was a National Guard in this Bedford. That's where I joined first.
Okay.
And then once I had went to the drills and I went to basic and AIT, it kind of opened up my mind to say, this is not that bad. I really want, even if I got to go to Vietnam, I want to do it. But it was June of '67 before I joined the regular Army.
Okay.
And that's when they sent
me. So
you
spent some time in the National Guard, then
yes.
You went to the regular Army. National Guard, was that a pretty good experience for you?
Yeah, it gave me an idea of what it was about, sent me to the training. I got to meet a lot of people from around the county that I didn't know before. But all in all, it was a good experience.
Yes.
Just different.
All right. So you're down in Kentucky in basic training, probably an 18, 19-year-old, somewhere around there?
I was probably 18.
18?
Yeah.
What did you think of basic training?
I thought it was hard. I thought it was tough. I'm not exactly sure how. I know they've changed some of the training and the things that they do now. But even I had kind of been raised on a farm, and I knew how to put up hay, and I knew you sweat, and I knew it hurt, and all this sort of stuff. But in basic training, they expected me to have physical stamina, plus to pick up everything that they taught me and then pass a test at the end of the course to graduate. You have to graduate from everything in the military, and there frankly is a number of people that don't because they can't remember how to do certain things. But it was tougher than I expected.
Well, did you feel like you was in pretty good shape when you went ahead and went there? But
probably not. I probably didn't. I was stressed probably more. But if you compare basic training to jump school or ranger school, it is not all that strenuous. It's a matter of perception and how much you think you can take. It has to do with your attitude. But anyone who goes to basic training should prepare themselves before. They should run, do physical exercises, and commit themselves to be able to complete it.
Lee, would the basic training in the World War II era compared to his era, now we're talking about Vietnam era, would there have been much different in the training?
Well, of course, I don't know how much they went through, but ours was rough. I mean, we were in Texas in August, and just that.
Hot.
But then you do all the physical bit, and you do the rifle range, you do the whole. Right. They train you as a foot soldier, even though you're in the Air Force.
Yeah.
And you learn to protect yourself, and you learn to, as he said, depend. You have to depend on your buddies, but you also have to depend on you being able to keep up and survive. So they built up. They did us. They're building lungs. They were building our wind. And we marched and ran every place we went.
Yeah. Well, it's a good place to lose weight.
Yes.
Well, I was 150 when I went in, so I went up because I had food.
Oh.
Didn't have much food in the Depression, but when you went in the Army, you suddenly got food.
Yeah. Roy, what about you? What year? Where'd you come from?
Well, originally my family's from Wells County, Indiana, and they moved there in the 1830s, and like typical white settlers, moved in where the Indians hadn't been removed yet, and intermarried, and then generations and generations and generations. I'm a typical American. I can probably point to someplace on my family tree and find every European country represented.
Okay.
You know, but you know, and by the same token, I think only one of my 8 great-great-grandfathers came post-Civil War. Everybody else was in the country before the Civil War. So I'm the descendant of Civil War veterans, you know, and my family has had a big tradition of military service. My father was in World War II in Korea. My grandfather Drake was in World War I at a point in time that it was a segregated army, and he was the white officer of a black troop. And my grandfather Smith was in the Navy in World War I, and then in the Merchant Marines in World War II. Basically because he wanted sea duty again. That he went back to the Navy and said, you know, I want to go back in. And they said, well, fine, Mr. Smith, but you know, you're in your 40s. We really don't want to put you back out to sea. Yeah. And he used some colorful sailor language and then told them where they could put that idea, and walked right next door to the Merchant Marine. And they sat there and I said, Mr. Smith, you were a quartermaster in World War I. We'll make you a sailing officer. And so he sailed oil tankers from the East Coast to Russia, and you know, back when Russia was our ally rather than our mortal enemy. Right. And so he did 2 wars, you know, and so the concept of me not going to war, I guess it never was there, you know, that I expected to do military service. That I graduated from Eastbrook High School, which was a consolidation, in 1969. I went to Rose-Hulman. At that point in time, 2 years worth of ROTC was a requirement at Rose-Hulman. It's now just an option that you do there. I was a reasonably bright kid, but had gone to a country school and did not have the kind of mathematics background that I really needed at Rose-Hulman. So I was there for 2 quarters and decided not to go back for my spring quarter. Came back home. All my friends were either still in college or had been drafted or volunteered for service. And I looked around and I said, I'm not sticking around Van Buren, Indiana. I'm going into the service. So I was in the Army before they'd even changed my draft classification from S2. I was never a 1A that I was in, and then 3 years active, and then a total of 28 in either the Army Reserve or the National Guard.
So, Roy, you went in then about 1970?
April the 8th, 1970.
April the 8th, you remember? Well, it's almost, what is
Today.
today? April 8th? Well, what? This is an anniversary. Yeah. So that was 40 years ago today.
Yep.
Hey, well, your timing was great, Lee, in getting Roy in here on this anniversary. 40 years today, you joined up.
Right.
And so, again, what was your thinking? Why did you join up then? I mean, because obviously it did run in your genealogy. I mean, I was going to ask you too. You mentioned about the Civil War. Were you able to know where these your ancestors, where they fought, who they fought with, Union, Confederate? Who did they?
The biggest part of my ancestors that fought in the Civil War fought for a regiment that was raised in the Marion, Hartford City, Huntington area, and it was named the Morton Rifles.
I've heard of it.
After Oliver Morton, the governor at the time.
Governor Morton.
And the actual number designation was 36 Infantry.
Okay, I've heard. I do a reenactment up at Hartford City in the fall, so I've heard of the Morton. I met some guys that reenacted Morton Rifles, so I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, and in fact, when I have lived both down here in southern Indiana and in northern Indiana in my adult life, when I lived up in the Marion, Montpelier area, our VFW would do grave decorations, and one of my real thrills was to put the flag on the grave of my great-great-grandfather.
Yes.
Who was an 18-year-old in 1863 when they came back after the regiment had been raised in 1861, fought several battles, then were given furlough and basically replenished themselves with a lot of people, like my great-great-grandfather, who was the younger brother of an officer in the regiment, and that's what they did. They came back home. They were on furlough, but it was a recruiting furlough.
You're right.
And so my great-great-grandfather spent only the end of the war in the Civil War.
You know, and so he survived the war.
Right.
And you know, but again, the illustrious career of the Morton Rifles, I fully remember. So you had, again, great-grandparents, parents at Civil War, World War I. Did he go across the Great Water, World War I?
My grandfather Smith on destroyers, except for World War I destroyers are tiny even by that comparison.
Right.
And the one thing I did not realize until we were talking about it at one point in time, that even on a small ship like a destroyer, you had tons of people, which the Navy calls firemen, basically spending an 8-hour shift doing nothing but shoveling coal into a boiler, and that's the only way you got across the Atlantic.
Right.
You know that and just absolute backbreaking work, and the relative ease that we conducted war in Vietnam, and because I stayed in after that, I've seen the technology improve and stuff like that. Physically, it's not near the burden that our ancestors went through. Now, mentally, it may be tougher, but physically, you look at World War II, they had entire battalions of stevedores. That's now taken place by one man with one crane on one dock.
Right. It is. Yeah, it's a good point. So, and then World War I, World War II, then your father, and then also Korea. You said
Right.
too.
Right. My dad was called to active. My dad did World War II as an enlisted man. Went to IU, took an ROTC commission, was in the reserves, and was called to active duty 3 different times for about 6 months per time. Never went to Korea, but was called to active duty because of training considerations and other things like that.
So you have your whole family has had an illustrious military career.
Right.
Where did you go to basic training?
I went to what's called Little Korea sometimes, Fort Lenard Wood, Missouri.
Okay.
In fact, with Russ talking about it, it's brought back to me the fact that when I went to the induction center, I was one of maybe a half dozen volunteers that were going. The rest of them were draftees. And all of the draftees and a few of the regular Army people were going to Fort Knox. Because I was going into an MOS that had a high clearance level, they isolated the kids that were potential ASA people into only 3 different AITs, or 3 different basic training centers, so that that we were there and we could update the clearance forms and everything like that. Because even as a 19-year-old who had been nowhere and everything like that, the amount of checking and back checking and rechecking that the Army does for clearance, it's easier to do it from 2 or 3 basic training spots rather than, at the time, the Army probably had 20 different posts that were conducting basic training. And so for ASA, they consolidated. ASA means Army Security Agency.
Okay.
It's the electronic side of military intelligence. It's now under the rubric of INSCOM, Intelligence Command.
Did your basic training, would you say would be comparable to what Russell had been talking about?
Not so much. I was a good enough athlete that I was a Division III athlete. I played football and then ran indoor track for Rose Hallman. So I I was less than a month away from my last college track meet at the
Okay, so
point
you're
in time
in relatively good shape.
that I went in. And in fact, mainly because I was not a real big fan of my the one drill sergeant that was in charge of PT. I still got 100 on the 1 mile run, but I made a point of running a worse time
Oh, okay.
at the end of basic training than what I'd come in at, and he was sitting there glaring at me at the finish line because I think it was 6:02 that you had to do it in, and I came around at for my condition at the time, a relatively slow jog.
Yeah.
Heard him say 5:50. I'm about 5 yards away from the finish line. I just stopped and just took step by step where I was crossing that line right at 6:02, which was still 100 points on the PT test.
Yeah.
But it was, I had done like a 5:30 or 5:45 to enter basic training.
Right.
And then from there, I did AIT in Fort Devens, Massachusetts, which was then the Center for Intelligence for Electronic Intelligence. It has since been decommissioned, much the same as Fort Harrison. There's still some military activity there, but basically it's a civilian area that has military installations on it rather than being an active Army post.
Do you guys have a lot of love for your drill sergeants? I mean, didn't you just want to hug on them? Lee, you want to hug on your drill sergeant?
Sergeant Sakakini.
You still remember his name?
I remember his name very well.
Yeah.
But he was a dandy.
Yeah.
The thing you have to remember about training is that the guys that are doing the training have been there. They're trying to teach you how to survive when you get there. So it was a blessing in disguise. And an 18-year-old kid, I didn't appreciate him too much. But if you think back about it, everybody I've interviewed in this and that and talked to, all my instructors in all my training were veterans who had the background to tell me how to survive.
What about Russ? Do you have a lot of love for your drill sergeant?
Oh, I think we had two. I think we had a main one. Both of them were E6s.
Do you remember their names?
No, I do not. It's been too long.
You want to forget those names, huh?
That's right. But I think what we feared from them is because they were so demanding and they had so much power over you. So if they kept you up all night or whatever they did, it was okay. But in the end, I think both of them, their intention was to take care of us and make sure we wasn't hurt and make sure that we would get better physically and be able to pass the test. So I didn't particularly like them at the time, but I think they had our best interest in mind.
It seems to me, gentlemen, that there's only a short, relatively short period of time that they're getting you ready to go into a place where it's life and death situation. I mean, so it's there's only really a short window there of getting you guys ready for this, right?
You got 8 weeks usually. In World War II, it was 8 weeks, and then you were either in gunnery school in the Air Force.
Okay.
You were in gunnery school, or you took further training.
Yeah.
But then after that, you crew training, and in less than a year, you were overseas.
Roy, about 8 weeks?
8, and it's still pretty much 8 now. Part of my reserve time was being a reserve drill sergeant.
Okay.
So I've seen it from both sides. Okay. and as frustrated as I was with my drill sergeant, actually the platoon sergeant I had, who was a SFC, I had the utmost respect for him, and he was just one of those solid, firm, fair drill sergeants. Now, some of the rest of the drill sergeants in the company were the big yellers and screamers, like the one that led PT most of the time that I didn't care for and everything like that. But the actual platoon sergeant for my platoon, he was he was quiet, firm, told you what to do. Because I had had some ROTC training, I was one of the acting jacks. Part of the time I was squad leader, part of the time I was the trainee platoon sergeant. And
Okay.
so you know, I dealt with him a little more, as much as a trainee can, or you know, on a colleague basis. But even then, I mean, he was firm and fair with everybody. I mean,
Okay.
with a couple of exceptions, that the normal procedure is that you do a casual week coming into basic. And that's when they get you your initial haircut and do a lot of other things like that. Because of the way the training cycle worked, we only spent one day in the casual barracks, and our real drill sergeants picked us up after that. Well, we hadn't had our haircut yet. And so a couple of the draftees who you know were you know just infuriated to be there and everything like that, and had come in with
the long
hair
hair
down to the rear end. You know, they got identified more readily, and it unfortunately followed them for all 8 weeks that we were with the drill sergeants. You know, but I'll tell you the funny thing was, you know, that I never heard Drill Sergeant Height ever brag about his war experience or anything like that. He had a CIB, so you knew he'd been overseas in a combat zone. But I didn't know that. I didn't know until the day we marched in parade for graduation, when we were in khakis and the drill sergeants were in greens. I don't know why they did it that way, but they dressed it that way. Well, being in greens, he had all of his medals on. Yeah. And he was holder of the DSC. And I knew what it was. I was the only one in the platoon that did, you know, and I said to her, and I said, guys, they don't pass those out real quick. And he wouldn't talk about it.
He's been
there. It's just, that's, when we asked him about it after the graduation ceremony, he said, man, it's just what I got when I was in Vietnam.
Russell, when you went in, did they send you basic training in on to Vietnam in a short order, or?
No, I went through basic training in AIT at Knox as a National Guard.
Oh, okay.
Then the next summer, I joined, I changed my MOS to Supply Sergeant. Mm-hmm. And right after I got out of AIT the second time, I didn't have to go through basic but once, but I went through AIT. When I got out of that, they sent me to Vietnam. So,
and what, your rank over there was private or corporal?
I went over as a E3, and I came back as an E5.
Mm-hmm. And you spent a year there?
1 year, yeah.
Where were you at in Vietnam?
I was in Charlie Battery, 2nd 320th Artillery in the 101st, and I was, we jumped from hilltop to hilltop. It was a TED of 68, and we started like in a place called Phan Rang and went all the way down around Saigon, and then we ended up back up off the DMZ within that year period. So it depends on where that division was, and I guess the TED of 68 is what moved us out of the south on LSTs up to the north. So you don't stay in one place, you move all over.
So you were there when Ted hit?
Yes, 68 one, yeah.
Describe a little bit about that.
We were just doing the normal thing that we did, which we followed an infantry battalion, and in order to fire from them, or for them, they picked the guns up and us by helicopter and moved from hilltop to hilltop as the infantry battalion moved forward. You could see the flashes and hear the explosions from us. We were south of Way, so Way was one of the big centers where they got hit. So there was just a sudden intensity of combat, and they moved us in different places quicker, and they told us at the time what was happening, but the North Vietnamese had taken away, and we went up along the edge and fired for the battalion and the Marines as they moved through and took away back. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot more intense, a lot more problems, a lot more dangers during that time.
Well, was it a surprise?
Yeah, well, to me it was. I don't know if it was to anybody else, but it was just an escalation of everything that we were doing for probably maybe a 2-month period, something like that. And then later on, we got to go through Hue, and it was just destroyed. It was just, they had destroyed the buildings, the roads, the bridges, whatever was there. And I think they ended up in that citadel was their last defense before the Marines took them out of there. So it was pretty intense for a while.
Yeah. So the units that you were with at that time was pretty much engaged in the Tet Offensive during that time, and then the counteroffensive. And
yes.
When you talk about that period of time of Tet, the casualty, the civilians in that area, what was it like for them? Did they have time for evacuation at all?
There was flows of them coming down those roads on bicycles, and all the people coming out of those cities, and they came through us as they went out, so you could see them. They tried to get away. They were kind of caught between the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong and the Americans, Marines in the 101st. And all they were trying to do was escape with what they had. And it was I'm sure was a very horrible time for them. And how many of them were injured and how many of them were killed between the crossfire.
Casualties during that time, were you aware of what was going on during the Tet Offensive?
Yes, we had more. The artillery battery I was in did not suffer that many casualties because we were on a mountaintop generally, where we could get better fire than to be in the valley. Ours were more shrapnel fragments off of mortar rounds and things like that they would try to shoot us, knock us out, so we wouldn't be firing at them. The infantry suffered more than we did because they had to go into these towns and physically take these guys out. But what we suffered would have been multiplied many times more by the North Vietnamese and by the Viet Cong, because we had airplanes, we had the artillery, we had everything that put fire on them, where while they had artillery, they didn't have any airplanes. And they did hurt us with their artillery, but it didn't take us long in order to knock them out. During that time, they had a Russian might have been close to a 155, 156 in a cave. They would shove it out of the cave and shoot at us, and then pull that howitzer back in. And our fire direction officer named the target Peaches, and so he zeroed the guns on the opening of that cave, so that when they pulled it out, the infantry yelled Peaches on the radio, and they fired that concentration and knocked out the gun. So there's thousands of stories like that you can hear that are told and that were done in order to save lives and knock out those people. But I think they suffered a lot more than we did.
Yeah. Did you know many of the infantry?
Only those that I had contact with. If we were involved with some resupply together, or if we were involved in some kind of attack that required coordination to make contact on the ground, yes. But I didn't have much day-to-day contact with them.
What about did you work close with the South Vietnamese Army at all?
We had South Vietnamese that were with us. The infantry seemed to have more. The ones that were with us just had to do with coordination for where we were, where their units were, who was firing where, had to do with recon, had to do with interrogating that translated their language. But again, in my position, I didn't really coordinate. I saw them, but I really didn't coordinate with them on much of anything. I just saw them and saw what they were doing, but yes, we had some with us.
You know, you coming from a small town like Oolitic, and then all of a sudden you're finding yourself in Vietnam. I mean, that's quite an adjustment.
It is, but you're surrounded by Americans that speak the same language and have already been there a few months before you. You've had the training to prepare you to do it. You just do your job and keep your head down so you don't get shot or don't get hurt. And it's frankly not as bad as it seems. Once you get used to it and find out what's dangerous, you learn how to adapt to it.
Did you ever feel like at any time you were in a bad position?
Frankly, probably I could tell you a half a dozen times that I almost was killed, but I wasn't. One time I was running a support base where the helicopters come in and picked up the rations and stuff, and I had dug a hole to sleep in at night and put a roof over it. So they changed this base control from the 101st to the 82nd, and the lieutenant moved us. So we had to take our stuff up on this hill back inside the perimeter. And I just got my stuff up there, and I sat down, and we were looking down the hill toward that hole, and there was a 120, I guess it had been a 122 millimeter rocket hit in it, in the hole.
Oh.
And then on the backside of that hill, in the evening, if we could get away, we'd drive a deuce and a half down to the base of that hill into the river that come out of the Ashall Valley. And we swam in that just before dark each day, and it just cooled you off after bringing in all the helicopters and all that sort of stuff. So just before dark, we got back in the deuce and a half and started back up the hill, and behind us, there was a bunch of North Vietnamese laying along that river that started shooting right by my deuce and a half as we went up the hill. And there's a 50 caliber above us that was firing back as they were coming across that sandbar that we were swimming on. So I could tell if it had changed 5 minutes, I wouldn't be sitting here.
Yeah.
If the timing would have been, because those guys laid there, they didn't bother us because they were waiting on some kind of command to go up that hill, and we just missed it. Mm-hmm. And other sorts of times where you're driving down the road and you hear ping, 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 ping around your head from a sniper, something like that. There's a lot of different situations like this, and as I think about them, I think I'm very, very lucky in several cases. But that's, I guess, part of the experience.
I guess you really felt for those guys who had to go out in those jungles.
Yeah, my patrolling was limited to clearing the barbed wire around the battery. So each day we would go out with I was a corporal at the time, so they'd send me out with a patrol, and we'd go out maybe 100 yards and clear to see what was out there, if they had any, like one time I went out and they had a whole bunch of graves that we were set up beside of all these graves. They were just humps in the ground. And when we went out, we started finding these, they were like their form of grenade that was a powder bag that was covered in some kind, looked like a green plastic with a wick thing that they would light. And we found a couple of those, and we kept looking, and we started digging in those mounds. Those guys had opened those mounds up and filled them full of explosives. And then when we got back in the perimeter, they hit the edge of the perimeter, and we killed 57 of them as they tried to come in. So there's times that you wonder, given just a few more minutes, I wouldn't be here. Mm-hmm. But it's things like that. And I haven't talked about or thought about this in years.
Yeah. So it's coming back a little bit.
Yes, it kind of comes back.
Roy, is your experience anything like what Russ has been talking about when you got to Vietnam?
A little bit. It's a little bit hard to explain because even though a lot of it's nearly 40 years ago, a fair amount of the work that I did is still classified, and so I really try and dance around the edges of what exactly I did and everything like that. But I can tell you, as far as geography, I spent the first 5 months in country in the relative comfort of Cam Ranh Bay. I was in a radio research, which was our cover name, a radio research company that was an aviation company. We used to fly a flying platform from Cam Ranh Bay up to the north of Vietnam and back, and it was a listing post. Much more than that I can't say, but it was a listing post. I did that for 5 months. At that point in time, between drawdowns and things like that, there was an absolute need for more people of my MOS to work in the north part of the country. Russ talked about the 101st. Eventually ended up in the north part of the country. When I was there in 71 and 72, they were permanently set up in the north. That was their area. It was a more traditional Army structure of a corps headquarters in Da Nang, and then two divisional headquarters. The 101st in the very north, there was actually one battalion of the 5th. The rest of the 5th had gone home already, or one brigade of the 5th. There was one brigade of the 5th that had the places north of Quan Tri. From there on down was the 101st, and then below the 101st, still in First Corps control, was the Americal Division. And as an intelligence asset, we ran the field station in Phu Bai. And in addition to the field station, we would have company-size assets that supported each division, and then platoon-size assets that would support each brigade. And so oftentimes, especially because I did low-level analysis a big part of the time I was there, I would end up going out to fire bases and stuff like that. And when you're on a fire base, an awful lot of the times, while you've been doing your 12-hour work shift, the infantry's been outside. And so, they're in, you're not in good shape, but they're in even worse shape to do perimeter defense. So a lot of times, in addition to doing 12 hours on duty, you would do an 8-hour perimeter defense, and so that's the only time I fired a weapon in earnest. And it seems like whenever I talk to high school and below age people, the first thing they want to know is, did you kill anybody? Well, I fired at people. There were blood trails that came off of it that they discovered the next morning. If I hit them, I don't know. I probably feel more a sense of responsibility for death in some of the intel that I provided to brigade commanders, division commanders, you know, and they actioned on it immediately. And, you know, there were people that died because of what I had told a division commander.
So there were times when at the fire camps that there was some sniper fire. There was there actually was there any kind of attack, night attack, anything like that?
More probes than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
They just, you know, they wanted you to know that they were there, you know, and it was a probe, and to be honest, you know, even when you've had the night discipline, you know, to keep your night eyes and everything like that, if you're looking at movement in the bushes 100 meters away, it doesn't matter whether it's some dog hunting for scraps or somebody that's got ill intentions for you. Mm-hmm. You know, you do whatever the procedure was, and like I say, when you were back in Fubai and guarding an ammunition dump, you had to sit there and shout halt twice. You had to shout Dong Lai, which is halt in Vietnamese. Mm-hmm. You had to fire a warning shot. You know, then you could fire for effect. You know, well, you know, when I was back at Fubai, it never got that far, you know, that the activity would cease. In fire bases, the rules of engagement are a lot more succinct. So, yeah, you're firing things up first and asking questions later.
You know, certainly a different kind of war, Lee, than what you were in World War II, isn't it? When these guys talk about Vietnam, totally different.
War seems to march down through history from the Civil War, where they lined up and shot at each other, to the World War II and et cetera, Korea. Yeah. Korea, the guys that went in Korea tell terrible stories about the Chinese rushing, you know, just overwhelming.
My dad told those stories. I can remember that, talking about how the machine guns were so white, and they couldn't hold them anymore, and the Chinese kept coming. And coming.
Ours were so distinct. You had uniforms. You knew who the enemy was. Yeah. And today, you're just you're in a fog, and then usually you have to call someone and ask them if you can shoot back.
Right.
And
our past
I think my war was a lot cleaner.
Yeah, our past Vietnam vets, I remember this was that they had mentioned that sometimes they didn't know who the enemy was. Is that
from what he's saying, it's important to remember that rules of engagement can be changed each day, and the rules of engagement that we used were different than the ones that he used, because he was 3 or 4 years behind us. In 67, if it's moving, you can shoot it. But there's times that we had, I remember one time we was in a fire base and had a river going at the bottom. And these guys, you could hear off the hill, and you could hear, they had metal canteens with a chain with a lid on it, and they were rattling, and you could see flashlights. So what we did is we turned the guns around and looked down the tube and aimed and shot right into those guys filling up with the canteens. We didn't have to fire once. We didn't have to yell. All we had to do was shoot. So it depends on your time over there.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
There's one other educational thing that might be of interest to some of them, and it has to do with the way the Purple Heart is awarded. Should I explain that? In Vietnam one time, we got hit, and the rockets were hitting. I was in a tent. There was 3 of us, and when they went off, the shrapnel went through the tent and was shaking it, and I didn't have any shoes on. And I don't guess the other guys did either, but we had this hole dug out back. So I dove into that hole, and I took all the skin off of one hand and all the skin off of the bottom of one foot. There was a Spec 5 the next morning that says, "You want a Purple Heart?" I thought about it for a minute, and I thought, I didn't get shot. I didn't get no shrapnel. It couldn't be a Purple Heart. I don't want it. Okay, it went on like that, and I could have got 3 Purple Hearts, but no one told me it didn't have to be inflicted by the enemy. It only has to be combat related. So I've been thinking about sending back, I still got my medical record, and I've been thinking about just sending back a letter saying, okay, it was my mistake. I should have taken one. At the time, it didn't seem important, but as I get older, it is more important. So what I'm trying to say is it's not just shrapnel. It's not just getting shot. It is an injury inflicted by something to do during combat.
Okay. In the time period that you guys are in, I lived in that time period. Lee was living in that car. He was already principal, probably.
I was working over in the administration building. I
Okay.
can remember those days.
When we think of the Johnson administration, Lyndon Johnson administration, Vietnam War was always going to be a part of that. Of course, civil rights legislation, there was going to be other things of the Johnson. Richard Nixon, again, Vietnam, later on Watergate. But it was a time in our history in which there was a lot of disagreement, a lot of division over the Vietnam War. Still today, it can be a hot topic. Even after all these years, it can still be a topic. How do you guys now, that you had years of reflection and you were living through that time in which there were protest marches, a lot of anti-war, what's your feelings today? Whoever wants to speak first.
Well, I was probably always a little bit countercultural in the sense that a lot of my friends had gone on to more liberal places of education like IU and places like that. And, you know, I had friends of mine that were, or high school, I don't know, maybe friends might be a little too strong. Certainly high school acquaintances that were marching up in People's Park, you know, while I was over in Vietnam. In fact, one friend of mine that went to IU was a year behind me at Eastbrook High School. He made a point of cutting out IDS articles and mailing them to me occasionally, just to sit there and say, you know, hey, this is a whole different world than little rural Indiana that we grew up in, you know, and all that. But I believed in the justness of the cause, and I've felt that not just my service in Vietnam, but my service, you know, in opposing the Soviet Empire as a guardsman and a reservist was well spent. That the defense of the United States is paramount. That we fought a great and bloody civil war to determine that we were one country, and that you know, when the guy in charge says go, you go. You know, and it's about that simple.
You know, and having our veterans on Vietnam, whether Vietnam or Korean or World War II, again, I want to bring out that there was a lot of service that our soldiers did for the civilians there, right, Lee? I mean, we heard this in Vietnam. I mean, some of the things like health care, basic needs that our servicemen were providing to the Vietnamese people, Korean people, right down the line. I mean, and this is some things that gets overlooked, isn't it, Lee? At times, I mean, they were providing some real humanitarian service.
I'm sure. Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that, gentlemen?
Oh, very much so. It's the hardest part of, you know, 20th and 21st century war fighting is, you know, the nation building that goes on either during or after a conflict, and you know, in a lot of ways, you know, the Army's very well suited for something like that, you know, in and of the fact that, you know, we have helicopters with lift capacity. You know, that's why, you know, the Army was the first thing into Haiti. You know, the NGOs, you know, they do a very good job in their own way, but they don't have the physical assets that we do. You know, and and a big part of that, you know, and as somebody that's worked on a division staff and worked the two shop at a division staff, a big part of our time was spent with G6, you know, and G5, you know, doing the things that help the division, you know, get in with the people and get them on your side so that, you know, you're fighting only the recognized enemy, not, you know, the back door.
Russell, is this something too that you would agree that, I mean, there was about the humanitarian part there with the Vietnamese people?
I think the U.S. forces have become much more sophisticated in things like healthcare, psyops, than they were in Vietnam. I think they've learned over the years the importance of those things, and they're using them more. I think people are wrong when they burn the flag. I think people are wrong whenever they go to a gravesite of a soldier or Marine and harass the family. I think the judge was wrong that fined that the guy's father for whatever he fined him for. He had to pay for the court. It wasn't a fine. He had to pay for the court. But I think they're missing the point. When they burn the flag and they do those sorts of things, they're putting it on people who are trying to do a good job. The war that I went through, we didn't lose the war. There have been several people that have said over the last couple of months that I've heard them say, well, we lost the Vietnam War. Well, we didn't lose the one I was in, because every time we were told to do something or every time we made contact with the enemy, we did what we were supposed to. Of course, I wasn't there at the end, and you hear about fragging or you hear about other sorts of weird things, but it just does not make sense to me. The U.S. Army did not lose the Vietnam War. It was done politically. So each time somebody says that, it upsets me a little, because I don't think we lost it.
That's a good point. All wars have been political. I mean, I'm a student of the Civil War. I've studied it for years, but there was some politics going on. Well, I guess every war. Korea, there certainly was. World War II, I guess the whole part is. So I guess that's going to be a nature of the beast, isn't it, Russell?
Yeah, evidently.
Russell, I know our time is getting pretty short, and there's a lot of, I could chase a lot of rabbits on this, but did your military careers, how did it affect your life?
It affected me a great deal by living or being raised in Olettic. The Army educated me, got me in a position where I could meet a lot of really super people that I wouldn't have got to meet had I have not joined. I learned a lot of different things about different places in the world, how to problem solve, how to do many things that I am today versus what I had have been had I not gone. So it was just it was just a super experience for me. I would do it over and over again. The only thing that I wouldn't do is I wouldn't have got out at 25. I'd have waited the other 5. I maybe got promoted again. I had orders for Korea. I just did not want to go to Korea, and I was offered what I thought was a good job, and I got out. And I shouldn't have.
What did you end up doing in your civilian life, Larry?
I worked at Carpenter Body Works. The tank company used to be Brunner's Tank Company here. I worked at Lilly. And that's kind of it. I worked in several. I also, before I went in the Army, I was a limestone planerman, and I worked at that for a while. Yeah. So my dad warned me whenever he found out I was going to get out, and he told me, it's not what you remember. You cannot keep a job forever like we used to. Stay where you're at. And I didn't, and I should have. The Army is the best thing that ever happened to me and my family, because my family got to go to Panama, they got to go to Germany, they got to go to a lot of different places, and it was just a good experience for me.
Roy, how did it affect your life?
In a lot of different ways. I'm different than my siblings, I come from a family of 7 boys and 1 girl, and over half the boys have been in service, but I was the only one that did a combat tour. And so I'm different than my brothers, but I was different than them before too. So, you know, I'm not sure that I've got the perspective to say how it affected my life. I think maybe my siblings or other people that have known me my lifetime could say. I'm like Russ, though. I certainly don't regret doing any of it, and I would probably do it again. I'd probably be a little more diligent at IU so that I could take the commission that was offered from ROTC, but then rescinded because I hadn't finished my degree work yet, you know, and things like that. So there are regrets, and there are things I would do different, but as far as service, no, I would probably serve 30 again, or 31, I guess it was then. Well, that's the thing, because I don't start receiving a retirement check until August of this year when I turned 60. I've not even, I know it's there, and I know the general amount it's going to be, but I've got to sit there and look at points, you know, and the whole reserve system thing of how much time did I spend in the reserves, and how much is it worth, and, you know, and all that. So, you know, and certainly I won't be rich after August, so, you know, there's
nice
somebody that forgets lunch money, you know. Mr. Smith's no more likely to hand it to you now than before.
Gentlemen, you've been great guests, and we appreciate it very much. Lee, any final thoughts before?
No, you're talking about the Army affecting you. I grew up in extreme poverty out here in the south end of Bedford and Dutchtown, and when I went in the Army, I just found a home. Yeah. And but when the war was over, I mean, everybody was in, and when the war was over, everybody was out because we didn't need that Army anymore, or that Air Force. So, but the Army was, the short time I spent there with the GI Bill would probably change my life completely.
We've been honored to have our guest with us, a Vietnam era guest, Russell Webb, Roy Smith. Gentlemen, on behalf of everybody that I talk to out, and when I see you at Walmart and the restaurants out there, and you talk to me about the veteran program, I know it means a lot to this community. That's why we're keeping it going. And you guys have now become a part of our fraternity, our family, of those that have been on the program. And I want to thank you on behalf of Lawrence County, you people watching, for your service to our country. And Lee, I always tell you the same thing. I want to thank you. I'm going to close this part of the program doing something a little bit different today, because I've been reading this and I think it's been worth it. I'm going to think maybe for the next few programs, read a portion of this at the end of the program, because I think it's well worth reading. This was one of our guests, John I. Hill, World War II veteran that we had on the program. He wrote a journal. It was called The War as Lived By, John Hill, and he writes about his experience in Germany, 1944, 1945. Thought I'd read just a little bit about what he says. This is January 31st of 1945, Hoffen, Germany. The shelling slowed up in the afternoon. Lieutenant Hertzberger was hit that day. At nightfall, Riddle and I had a foxhole about 2.5 feet deep in the ground and about 6 foot from the top of the snow. It was about 2 feet wide and 5.5 feet long. I don't know how we ever did it, but we both managed to lay down in it. It was a job getting up for guard. As dark came, a mist came with it, and the snow was melting. Water began to seep into our hole. We went to sleep anyway, mainly from exhaustion. When early next morning we awoke, our uniforms were all wet on the side which was next to the ground. We were not alone, as the rest were in the same predicament. It was truly a very miserable night. It made one feel like if I could just get hit slightly so I could go back, all would be well. That morning, several prisoners were brought to us. We pulled out about 11:30, February 1st, 1945. We'd gone only about 300 yards when Jerry threw some shells at us. In this section, the snow was all pockmarked with shell holes, and the trees were cut badly. We kept going and came across a road. Jerry had us zeroed in. A shell came, but we heard it coming and hit the ditch. We began digging frantically in the snow or just laying there. The shell cut the top of a pine about 25 yards away. Another came screaming and whining, and it hit about 40 yards on the other side of us. Another was coming, and it hit close, so close the concussion was terrific. A pine fell in the road, and we got up moving again. We cut across the road and went into the wood. Some shells were falling to our left, but not very close. We moved out about 100 yards further, and they started dropping shells right on the column. I heard groaning and cries of pain ahead. The word came down for the medics, and 2 riflemen came carrying and dragging a boy of about 21 who was hit in both legs. The right leg had a huge shrapnel wound at the knee, and at least was half cut off. The other leg was hit. I heard he died. Both the boys were carrying him were crying. We went out just a few yards, and Lieutenant Kinsley lay in the snow face down, still grasping his carbine with one hand, and had a fur around his neck, which he had picked up somewhere, but he was very dead. From the Journal of the Wars Lived by John Hill, 1944 through 1945. I want to thank you for watching the Lawrence County Oral History Project. We'll be down and seeing you down the road pretty soon. Thanks again.